Hello again, Internet. I'm back for more of Odinmade Hero, the series where I try to learn how to make a game from scratch in the Odin programming language. If you're still here, you kind of know the drill by this point. And so yesterday, we were focused on establishing this simulation region concept in the code, where Casey had this idea to essentially cement this understanding of like high versus low frequency entities by thinking of them in terms of entities that are being simulated. You know, like movement is being simulated, state updates are happening, versus being stored where they are simply not being operated on. And so then this kind of cleans up this idea that you would have to think through whichever part of the code you're touching, whether or not you're working with low entities or high entities. Now you only ever work with high entities, and then they are made high, quote unquote, by virtue of the fact that you are trying to update their position or something about their state, like what kinds of effects they have applied to them, that sort of thing. All these different little, changes you can make to an entity while it's being simulated. You make to it when it's, in this shape, and it gets pulled out kind of in an opaque manner from the stored entity set. And yesterday's stream was kind of cut short because we were in the middle of making this change. It's a pretty big change. It's definitely, this time around, I can see the value that it brings and why Casey felt very strongly about moving the code in this direction. But it meant a whole lot of code had to be kind of moved around. And then the benefit is that we get to get rid of a lot of code when all is said and done. And we've already done quite a bit of that here, but there's a good amount more that needs to be done. And even at the end of yesterday's episode, Casey didn't have it compiling again, but I went through and just kind of commented out a bunch of stuff, made a bunch of changes. So now I can recompile, but it just doesn't work. We hit an assertion, or a panic rather, that tells us that we're trying to draw a null entity. So there's a whole bunch of changes that still need to be made. So I think we're just going to jump right back into making those changes with Casey and hopefully get things working again today so we can keep moving forward. And specifically today, what we'll do is we'll map entity indexes to pointers, and I think that might mean that some more game state changes will happen. And I feel like there's one other thing that I thought was worth bringing up as a consequence of yesterday's episode, but I'm not sure. I feel like looking at the code, it should remind me. Oh, there was something else about, I think, adding a generational index to the low entity, if I'm not mistaken. Low entity. Yeah, I think Casey put it to do down here. Add generational index or generation index to keep track of how up to date this entity is. So something like that. That came up in the Q&A, so we added a little note there, a little to-do. And so yeah, we can go ahead and jump right back into this and keep on working on this change, and it'll be good. We'll be able to keep making more changes to the game and get to, I think we're not too far away from starting to work on more rendering specific stuff, which is exciting for me because that's the domain that I'm most interested in, I think. But all of this has been interesting, and more so in retrospect, because I couldn't really internalize what was so valuable about going through each step that Casey took to build the entity system the way he did initially. But it was to gain that insight about how it needed to work to arrive at this whole simulation region concept that he decided on. And that, at this point now, makes a lot of good sense to me, and I can appreciate why that was important. I kept on talking about this off and on about what, at what point would you care to have we have the wherever the camera is pointing at in the game world, and that's where the character is, where the player is, and they're doing stuff and they're interacting with monsters and NPCs and doing all sorts of different stuff. But what about, like, why would you operate? What would you be doing that's different about these low entities? Like, how would the operations be different? And the answer is that they're not, right? It's just whether or not you're actually changing that state. And the difference is that you don't want to have all of that state in place being pulled all the time. You want to intermittently simulate the rest of the game world outside of the constant updates that you have to have where you're simulating where the camera is. And that is a lot more intuitive to me than the understanding that I had before with the old sort of design that we had. So with all that being said, we can go ahead and get started.
Ideas. Hopefully this won't be too bad with the drop frames. If not, you can catch it on the YouTube, I guess. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code an entire game live on Twitch. No libraries, no engine, just us and code and awesomeness. Honestly, you know, I'm feeling pretty good about it where it's at these days because we've been working on our engine spec stuff, and I feel like, had a really big breakthrough yesterday where we were like, here is a good way we can make a lot of the code nice and simplified and still do all the things that we want. And it was pretty exciting. But we only did half of the sort of restructuring work yesterday, and I want to go do the other half now and get right back into it. So I'm not even going to spend any time on the preamble. I'm just going to say, if you have pre-ordered the game on handmadehero.org, handmadehero.org. If you have pre-ordered the game using the little pre-order button, you should have gotten a link in your email, and that link allows you to download the source code to the game every night. If you download it, you should have gotten a zip file, and inside that zip file there's lots of little zips. Day 63, since we're on day 64, unzip day 63 zip file, that is the one that I am basically on right now, and so you'll be exactly where I am if you want to follow along home. So that's what you want to do if you're into that. So let's take a look here at the situation as it stands. We got a bunch of stuff to do, so let's do it. So basically I made the change yesterday where I decided we were going to break things down into simulation regions. There are sort of these things you can create at any time that encompass some area of the game world, and then you can simulate it, and then you can write it back. So it basically like lofts it up into a simulatable form, does the simulation, and chunks it back out again, right? Now I thought of something yesterday after we'd started as well, but we didn't actually quite get to it. I was like, I also feel like there's something we can do now that will sort of make it easier for us to get to where we want to go programming-wise. And that is, since low entity and high entity aren't really what we wanted to use anyway. I'll explain this in a little bit more detail if I open up the sim region file here. We've got the sim entity, and that's what we were working on, right? And then it had, we were still referencing the low entity stuff because while we're working on the sim entity, we have to go back and get this other data. Now that's not actually the way I envision it working when we're actually done with the entity system. What I actually wanted to do, and I sort of alluded to this yesterday, was I wanted to make it so that the storage version of the entity is like the most minimal compressed set of information that stores what that entity needs to remember. But then the high entity just has all that stuff blown out. And so what I thought we could do before we get to the point where we've actually done that work to make that sort of forward and backward happen, instead of constantly referring to the two entities, what I was thinking would actually be much better is we just essentially have one entity type, and we just move it between the two. We just block copy it, basically, right? So what I was thinking is we just say, okay, basically we've got, you know, the extra stuff that's on the sim entity. We'll just stick the low entity just flat out in here, right? Like that. Like it's just there, right? And furthermore, we could even do something a little more aggressive. Like we could actually just stick this guy in here. We could actually make a sim entity, you know, have all the same members as this guy does, and then just have the low entity, like do it the other way around. In fact, I think I like that better for now, because like I said, we don't care at all about the storage space yet, because this is not the way we're going to do it at the very end. We just want something that's easy for us to do prototyping-wise in that sense. So I think I might do it exactly the opposite way, basically go like this. So everything's in the sim entity, and then what happens is the low entity is just a sim entity stored, right? This is the stored version of that, right? If that.
That is actually a lot easier to reason about, because now you don't ever have to remember, right? Like, what do I have on the stored format, and what do I have on the simulated format or the active format? I still don't know. I mean, if you're simulating something that's like implicitly saying it's active, and I guess that just ties into the whole simulation region concept that we've arrived at this point. So I guess I'm fine with that name. So if we go over here, we can just yank all of that, and yeah, we can just replace that. Of course, now this has to have the stored sim entity, and at this point I feel like we can just do that almost. Just call it a flat out entity that is stored, and then this would be something like stored entity, I don't know, or pointer, right, to a a regular entity. I don't know. Something like that, maybe. What is this error saying? Probably shouldn't pay attention to it. So we have 2 Ps. I don't know how Casey wants to handle that. I guess for now, I'll just call it a world P. This is like a region P or something like that. Or relative P. Yeah.
Makes sense. And so we'll actually have, at some point, we'll go ahead and start making the low entity be something actually real, but for now it'll just be a thing that stores everything that was in the sim entity to begin with. Does that make sense? That way it gets us out of the business of having to deal with that dichotomy, because we don't actually want that dichotomy ever. We're just going to treat, especially due to this new change, we're always just going to treat the low entities as like a packed, some kind of thing where we cram down the blown out sim entity stuff into a smaller space so that we don't pay a huge memory footprint for having things be giant or that sort of stuff. All right. So I think that's the way I want to do it. And so what that means is that I don't want to see low entity in here at all, basically, right? I don't want to see this at all. So we're going to go through here just before we finish doing the porting work, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that entire concept, right? So basically, let's see here. So when we do the nsim and the stored entity here, when we grab that stored entity, all we're really going to do on that, so like change entity location, for example, all of that sort of stuff will now no longer actually look directly at one of these guys anymore. Yeah, because change entity location was still working on those guys. So what we do is we grab the stored entity out, right? We basically make the stored entities sim entity. What did I actually call that there? The stored version, right? So this is, I guess I should call it sim for now. It's just going to be equal to the entity, right?
Yeah, it just kind of seems like... and first of all, I was just thinking this to myself. I should just pull this stuff into sim because that's where we have this other entity type. So I'll just go ahead and drop that down in here. And yeah, I mean, sim makes more sense because that is the sim entity, and this is actually a container for that. I don't know. Naming is just such a weird thing. Like, you're trying so hard to come up with the language that best describes the reality of what it is you're doing, but what language best applies is so open to interpretation. Now, I kind of want to group some of these, but it's weird because now we have like different understandings of, like, we have a Z, we have a delta tile Z that is just an int, or an I32 actually. I guess that kind of makes sense to go up here. And who knows how much of any of these will stick around in the shape that they're taking right now. A sword low index, that can just go up here, and then honestly both of these can just get stored right there. And then we have the T-bob, that can go with the distance remaining. Like, some of these things make more sense to group together according to like what they're relevant to. And then on the other hand, it's like if something is the same type as another thing, just cut down on the amount of noise, right? Get rid of all that noise if you can. Same thing with like the P and the delta P. So yeah, that's actually gonna... I was making some changes and I was looking at those changes I was having to make, and I was like, yeah, this is definitely not the shape this is gonna take, because the delta P was on the stored or the low entity before, and the regular P was on the simulated entity, and that made no sense, right? Like, those two things should probably always be grouped together. And then distance remaining, I think we can just stuff over here. And so now we've kind of, oh, actually, T-bob can go over there too. Yeah. Facing direction, what was that? Was that an int? I think that was an int. That was definitely supposed to be an int. Yeah, I missed that. So that can go right there. And honestly, it just looks cleaner. It looks like there's less stuff going on, even though it's the same number of members, right? And it almost makes more sense to me just because you want to think of things in terms of data, right? And not necessarily like the abstraction of how things go together. But maybe that's bad. Like, this feels bad because we have a DZ which is like that relative delta in the Z direction, but then there's like the whole tile we're on, but then there's a chunk Z, and then there's a regular Z. Like there's just too many. How can you have 4 different representations of what the hell is going on with this entity in Z? That's just so, that's so much. And it makes me feel like I did something wrong copying this over, but anyway, so down in end sim, like Casey was starting to demonstrate, we take that stored entity that we grabbed out of the low entity set, soon to become the stored entity set, and then we point it at the dereferenced high entity or sim entity, right? We assign, yeah. What is this notification about? Getting random notifications to tell me something I already knew. Why would you just tell me that randomly? I already knew. Yeah, because this is coming out of the sim region, which just has a list, or a slice rather, of simulated entities. And this is where it got kind of strange, as I was looking at what code we were going to have to change, right? Like going over all of the high entities in the game for stuff like this. Like now you have to count on the fact that all the entities that you're passing in for a region are all of the correct entities that you want to be iterating over to do like collision detection and stuff. So we go in here, yeah, like this move entity stuff probably has to take a region or something, or we have to get it out inside of the procedure call somehow to be able to know what entities the one that we're testing, the one that we're moving, actually has a possibility of colliding against. Okay, so we get that out, and then what?
So we're basically going to block copy it into the stored entity. And then the other thing we have to do is we have to update that low position, right? And that low position, I guess, is the one thing that we wouldn't want in here, right? Because that's something that only exists for the low entity, right? Like so.
Okay, so that simplifies things a little bit. If we go back over here, this world P can still go right here. And that makes perfect sense because this is always static. I mean, it updates, but it should update transparently as the simulated entity is being basically as the simulation it's being run through, right, is ending. It gets made inactive again, but that world position doesn't matter because the position that we care about while we're working on it is all relative to whatever the region it is that we're focused on.
So basically we just have all of this stuff is legitimate things that we had in here for our sim entities. Yeah, but then this world position P obviously only exists for a low entity. That's not a thing that we ever talk about in sim space. So there we go. That's fine. And then this would still work, I guess. So we could still use the change entity location thing. And in fact, I guess all of this stuff pretty much still works exactly that way. There really isn't actually, I guess, anything else that we would have to change, because the only places that we were talking about it in here were the places where we decompress it, essentially. So when we go to do add entity, I guess all we would do is say now, instead of let's see here. Instead of just copying the position in like we were doing here, we would actually just copy the rest of it. So we basically say everything that's in our sim region entity there, we would go ahead and just overwrite basically all of this except for the storage index, although we can even overwrite the storage index because technically that's coming from the other guy as well, right? And normally the way I would do this is I would pull out these members that were, so the storage index only exists in the sim entity. Normally I would pull these guys out so that these guys are in their own struct that we talk about separately. But since I know that eventually this is not how it's going to actually be stored, I'm not going to bother doing that because I don't care about the fact that we're storing that additional uint in there. Yeah. So basically, I'm just going to go ahead and copy it out wholesale. Just copy that sim out entirely. And later on, we'll do the compression there. And I feel like, did we ever actually set... I don't know if we ever actually set the storage index. The storage index has to be set properly, but I don't think we ever did. So actually add entity, what add entity should be doing when we call it here, right? Add entity should be taking where it should store it back. So that low entity index should actually be there. That was just a mistake. We hadn't finished porting yesterday, so we probably didn't get to everything that we should have been doing. So let's go ahead and make sure that that's true. So when we do that add entity, we'll go ahead and pass the low entity index here. Low entity. I'm not in a good typing alignment. Feng Shui is off or something there. The Feng Shui is off, people. Let's move this. There we go. Okay, much better. So I'm going to pass that low into the index, and that way I can store it in here. So after we romp this guy, we will go ahead and put his storage index in there, like that. And actually, what I could do too, let's loft that up even one more. I guess the reason we can't quite do that is because we overwrite everybody here. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So I guess what add entity would want to do too is want to take one of these, like so. So that it could do this. There we go. And we'll have to think about, I guess all of this will be sorted when we actually do the compression, decompression stuff, because then we won't be using kind of the cheesy little romp over thing that we're doing there. All right, so in this add entity.
What? He did this and then yanked that out to put it in this wrapped call. I didn't follow that. Not even a little bit.
Can't quite do that. It's because we overwrite everybody here. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So I guess what add entity would want to do too is want to take one of these, like so, so that it could do this. There we go. And we'll have to think about, I guess all of this will be sorted when we actually do the compression, decompression stuff, because then we won't be using kind of the cheesy little romp over thing that we're doing there. All right, so in this add entity.
So he just decides that we can't do that right there because we don't want to be overwriting the entity that we add in here. Yeah, I'm not sure.
After we go ahead and get the entity, instead of clearing it now, we're not going to actually do that clear. What we're going to do is do the decompression. And so I'll say here to do, this should really be a decompression step, not a copy, but we don't have that yet. So we've got our entity, we have our source, I guess I'll still call it source, and we're going to grab that and copy it over. And then we also want to make sure that our storage index is going to be that low entity index. And I guess I'll change it to storage index as well.
Okay, so it just has to happen in here instead of in that other call. So we have a storage index. I'm just calling it an int because I'm naughty like that. And the source it takes now is a low entity pointer. And so this instead becomes that dereferenced assignment. And then, well, this should be result. Get that right. Because, yeah, we declare that here. And sim region M, how did that even happen? I have no idea. So we do that, and then we overwrite the, I did it again. We overwrite the storage index with the low index, or the storage index that we're passing in. Okay, so yeah, that got moved into there from here. I see. And so this is wrong. This needs to take, what does it take? I just wrote it. I don't know. It takes the storage index, change that here. And it takes the source. Is that it? Yeah. Like, when does this ever get called independently of this? When does add entity 1 ever get called independently of add entity 2? I still don't have a better name for it than that. It's inexplicable, right? Whatever.
There we go. So, now that we've got that straightened away, this is just passing those on to the next guy, and then it also happens to have already computed its position, and so it'll actually just go ahead and overwrite the position there. Yeah, again, this would be more meaningful if we weren't actually still storing the position out as well, but you can imagine, again, once we compress it, we wouldn't be storing that position, so we kind of should leave that in there since that's the path that will actually have to get taken. All right, so that's fine, and now we need to go ahead and move our entity stuff here out of handmade.h, so we want to grab that out. Let's take a look at what else we've got here. We need our hit points, so there's our hit points. That may be it for the things that we actually have in here. Looks that way.
I'll go ahead and do the same thing. I already moved the entity type stuff out, but this here is like, this is weird. This is more like render related stuff, so I feel like even though it has entity and the type name, it should stay in there. What was the other thing? It was hit points, so all of that probably. Oh, I took the hero bitmaps too, not that. Don't want to pull that out. So we take that and throw that up there. And I think that's fine. But I want to put this enum down here. Because why not? And then any other constants we want can go up there. And that looks good.
All right, and so when we do an end sim, right, okay, so now we got to do the entity mapping hash table. We talked about that. I guess we might as well just jump in and do it. So basically what's going to happen, we talked about this yesterday, we'll talk about it again. When we loft everything up into a sim region, we basically are creating a secondary array of these sort of sim entities, which are all going to be processed, as part of the simulation. But since we have entities stored often in, we have the permanent storage of all the entities in the world that's in a different place, maybe compressed, maybe stored like what we were saying, the position changes when you go from one to the other, that sort of thing. We need to be able to persist references to entities. So basically, an entity is going to want to talk about, when it's talking about, say, the fact that, what's going on here? Here we go. When it's talking about another entity, it's going to use its index probably into the low entity array, right? Because that's a stable index that you can always use. Your index into the array of the other kinds of entities, the sim entities, right? This array is not stable. Your index in that array is just totally dependent on what sim region is being talked about at a given time, right? So if in here we have something like, for example, what the sword was, right? Because remember we used this to point to who the sword was, right? If we have something like that, we need that to be able to persist. And so a sword low index, we need to be able to get from that to the actual sword. And the problem with that is we don't actually know how to do that in our current system. We loft things up into the sim, and we don't really have any way of actually dealing with the fact that we need to reference or do cross-referencing. So what we need to do is we need to have some way of doing that cross-referencing. And so what I thought I would do is, again, I can just make like a hash table in here, for example. And the hash table would just tell me, for any low entity index, it would tell me where the high entity index was, like basically where the sim entity was in this array. It's not an operation we probably do that often, so I don't really care too much about making it be particularly fast or anything, but that's basically it. And so what we'd want to do, right, is we'd want to be able to change this into essentially a sim entity pointer, right, like so. We'd want to be able to change that into a sim entity pointer so that we could just get at the sword whenever we wanted to, and then when it gets stored back, that is when we would actually go and turn it into a low, into a low index, right? That's what we'd want to do, ideally.
Okay, so let's go ahead and make that same change. So over here, rather than this just being an integer that points to an index in the low set, right? We just have, well, it's still a sword low index, which is weird, but he's making it a sim pointer. Should it be a low entity pointer instead? I don't know, but I'll just move that over here and we'll stick with the same name for now just to avoid confusion. I can pick a name I like better if I want.
So that's what I'm thinking about, right? That's what I was thinking about. And what we could do, in fact, this kind of seems like maybe it's worth doing already just because it kind of points towards the direction we would want to go. What we could do is make a little union here, right? Where we basically have a low index and a sim entity pointer, right? Like this. So if we wanted to, we could do like index and pointer, I guess. Something like that. I don't know. What we could do is say that this is actually like an entity reference, like so. I'm having trouble typing today. An entity reference, and this is like, an entity reference. It's the thing that references the sword.
That reminds me, did I still have this notion? I think I had, yeah, when I was editing the code, just to get it to compile after yesterday's stream, there was this old entity reference index I was hanging around, and I think that was dead from some earlier prototyping stuff that Casey was kind of entertaining. But here, yeah, I'm not totally sure. This also reminds me about yesterday's little tangent about using the temp allocator for allocating the slices that we wanted to use for the sim region. Likewise, I'm not sure how to do this most appropriately in Odin. I think we could do something like a raw union. That would be like strictly the most like one-to-one example or one-to-one implementation with respect to what Casey is doing, but surely there's a better way than this. And I did something wrong here. Does it go like that? Yeah. So something like this, I think. I'm not totally sure. I think we could use, I mean, I suppose we could use like an enumerated array maybe? I don't know. No, that doesn't seem quite right. I'm just going to stick with this for now, and then when a better answer reveals itself to me, as per usual, I'll entertain adding it in then. So this is actually, instead of just the entity pointer, we're bundling in the index as well, and we're going to call it our entity reference to a plain old sword. And I'm just thinking more generically at this point about what it is we're doing in here, and what it is we're actually giving this simulated entity. Like, it doesn't have to be a player. Only the player has a sword right now as far as our implementation is concerned. But like, imagine it was like a list of tools or equipment instead. And I'm thinking about what if it was just, you know, a slice of entity references, so that, you know, the entity that we're dealing with here could have, if it's a mob, it would be a list of stuff that it would drop if it died potentially. But if it's the player, it's like, you know, you got your sword, you got your pickaxe, you've got a whole bunch of different stuff, right? Not just a sword. So just thinking out loud with that. I don't know if it's actually how you would want to do something like that, but it just seems like the logical next step you would take this in, right?
And so what'll happen is, when these things get loaded, right, references get pulled in, and when they go away, they get converted back to indexes, right? And that seems like a pretty reasonable thing to me. I don't know, we'll see. Again, like, this is our experimentation period, so we are allowed to sort of figure out what sorts of stuff we want to do by trying. So that's what I would say. I'd say that's what we want to do. And then for the entity references that are in here, basically we map them in and map them out in that exact same way that we used to do. So you can imagine in here, when we actually do our storage operation, right? When we do our stored sim entity, this block copies that entity into the sim version. Well, we want to go ahead and change that sword. We want to go and excuse me, go ahead and change that sword pointer into an index. So we essentially want to do this. In fact, I guess we could just make a function for it, which is like, you know, I don't know, we don't have a good, I guess what we could call it, store entity reference, like so. And then we would just pass it that address. And it turns out that we really don't have to do anything to make that happen, right? It's really, really simple. If we want to convert entity reference from its pointer into, excuse me.
I know for a fact that this caused me a lot of problems when I was doing this project in Zig. And it wasn't because of Zig, it was just because my understanding of what was going on was pretty poor. So I'm going to hopefully do a better job this time around of understanding what it is we're actually doing here. So we're going to have our store entity reference procedure. And this might very well go away if I can find a more elegant way to do this with Odin, but we'll see. And it's going to take the reference. Is that right? It's just going to be like that, isn't it? And then we could switch on it. Like, it kind of seems like it should just be an enum. Almost. Where it's either a sim entity pointer or it's an index. And then you just get the thing out. Right? Is that right? I don't know. The problem is that they're different types, and it's not like this would be the right thing, right? Because this, well, I mean, if it was a pointer, yeah, and in that case, does this have to be a 32-bit wide thing? I genuinely don't know. Like, I think maybe something like this. Maybe I'll put a pin in that because I really don't know. Okay, so this over here gets called and there we are.
Into a permanent index, we have a really easy way of doing that. I guess we don't want to call that sword, probably, huh? And actually, I guess this is a sim entity. This is actually an entity reference, like so. All right, and so what we would do there is say, first of all, if the ref pointer is not equal to 0, right? If the ref pointer is equal to 0, then hey, the index would also be 0, right? Because it's 0 and 0, so we don't have to do anything. But if the ref pointer is not equal to 0, then what we would do is we just say, well, whatever it's pointing at, it's just that guy's storage index, right? Is what we want to actually store, right? Really, really straightforward. Now,
and I think the reason why it was extra confusing in Zig is because I couldn't have a nil pointer. I had to make it optional, right? So this might not cause me nearly as much pain doing it this way, but I feel like there's just got to be a better way than this, a more elegant way. So we check to see if that pointer is not nil. Is that right? I got to make sure I get this right because I've done this wrong. I've gotten these checks swapped so many times. If it is not nil, right, that is what that is saying. In which case, ref pointer storage index comes out.
Not particularly difficult at all, right? So what we would do there is we just say the index equals the storage index, and then we're done. And so that's really easy. When we do the endsim, that's a really easy thing to do, and that would translate our stuff back into storage, and everything's fine. But the part that I was more concerned about, and the reason I said we need a hash table, is the opposite. So when we actually bring an entity in, right, that's the point where we have to actually start to care.
So this actually won't even let me do it the way he is doing it. Cannot assign. What is this error actually saying? Oh, cannot. Whoa. Cannot dereference entity of type sim entity. This should be, well, is that even correct? Yeah, no, that just gives us, right. I guess I hadn't. Well, it just means that we don't have to dereference it, right? I mean, I guess if we wanted the pointer, and this shouldn't take the whole pointer, or this shouldn't take the pointer, it should take the whole entity reference, right? Yeah, I don't know if this right here, because we're pulling it out, and it's not a pointer, but Casey is iterating over the regions entities as pointers, so I don't know if that's going to cause us problems later, but if it does, then we can readjust, no big deal. This is really the issue that we have now, which is that I cannot assign into type to U32. Okay, so that's just because I was messing with stuff over here and made this a U32, and I think for now we'll just leave it as an int. And what is this now? Well, that's correct. What is this? That is also an int. So what is your problem now? Oh, because it's a procedure parameter. Well, does he pass it in by reference? He does. This is a reference to a reference. So then that has to be passed in by address, and now I think we're good. Okay. So maybe not too painful after all. We'll see.
The storage and everything's fine. But the part that I was more concerned about, and the reason I said we need a hash table, is the opposite. So when we actually bring an entity in, right, that's the point where we have to actually start to care about that hash table, some way of mapping. Because what's going to happen is, when we have one of our low entities come in, right, and I suppose we should assert here that you're not supposed to add an entity that doesn't have a source at the moment. Maybe in the future we'll allow that. Yeah, I guess we could allow that. Yeah, all right, never mind. I won't do that yet. So when we actually go in here, what I'll do is I'll say if source. So assuming that there was a source entity, right, then what we want to do is now we want to map, like things like the sword, we want to map that in. And so much like I had the story.
Okay. So back over here, actually, down in here, this should only happen, like he was just saying, if this is not nil, right? If the low entity, it's just weird that he's calling it the source. I don't know why, but it's just like an added layer of questioning what is going on here. I feel like this should just say stored. You know, this is the stored entity, whose simulated entity that it wraps we want to assign the result to. But we're overriding the storage index to be whatever we passed in here. I don't know. Then again, maybe source does make sense because we're overriding the storage index here with where we want that new simulated entity's storage index to point to. I don't know. It's a little bit strange, but it's still not bad. We're just not there yet. We got a ways to go.
Store version, store entity reference, right? I want to have a load as well, right? I want to have a way to do a load entity reference. And that's just a lot harder because what do we do, right? All we have is well, we have the same start, I guess, which is to say, if it's not equal to 0, we have to do something about it. But what exactly is it that we're going to do?
Okay, and then he moves, where's that procedure? Up here. Yeah, so we'll just throw it right there. And then we'll copy it. And now we have a load and a store. And then this checks the storage index. Yeah, I think I was getting into trouble with accessing this and trying to do the load, but then this would be nil or undefined. I mean, it took me a long time just to figure out that you don't want to set pointers to be undefined as their default value, because that just creates a whole lot of headache and confusion that might not even be allowed anymore. But I can't remember. It's been a while since I've looked at anything Zig related. Okay, so we have that storage index, and if that is not equal to 0, and this is actually 0, not a nil check, then what do we do? Like Casey said, what on earth do we do? What happened here? Oh no, that should not have happened. Why did this get all lowercase? That's weird.
And the answer is I don't actually know. Hash table was my first instinct, right? What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to say something like, okay, the ref, oops, that's the wrong one, sorry. We only have that, we only have the index, right? So what I want to be able to do is say, okay, the pointer equals like get sim entity from index, right? I want to be able to say that and pass whatever that index actually is and get back a pointer to an entity that's in the sim region, right? And so the reason I was thinking of hash table is because I have an index, I want a pointer, I could just have it's just a straightforward map. It's just a mapping from pointer to index, and that seems like the easiest thing to do, right? That just seems like the easiest way to go. And then that will go ahead and give me that, that'll translate that reference, and that'll be the end of it, right? What I could actually do here too, just to double check, I might want to do something like getting this and asserting that the pointer was actually valid, because there should never be a case where you're referencing something and it's not in there. And in fact, what we should do is I think we actually want to have a policy where we actually pull in. We probably want to pull things in, because thinking about this a little bit more, when you go for a simulation region, anything that other people were using, you presumably want to pull those things in as well, right? That's kind of interesting. This is so much fun. I love programming complex systems because there's so many interesting things to think about. But if you think about that, right, like if I go ahead and do a region query, if I'm referencing somebody, presumably I'd want to pull them in as well. And maybe not anything that they're referencing, because they won't get simulated perhaps themselves, but because we already have that notion of simulated, not simulated that we're going to put in, right? But just in terms of whether they're referenceable. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know. And I don't know how far we want to crawl out. We may want to crawl out through all the references. We may not. I don't know. That's kind of an interesting question, and it depends on how complicated our game logic gets, what we want that answer to be. And I'm not exactly sure.
You'd have to... I totally see what he's saying here. It would like really depend heavily on how... exactly what are you designing to where that would be required, where you've got like this entity reference hanging on something. For things like equipment, it probably you probably always want to load that in. But what if it's like an NPC that's just related to a quest, and then it's like the check is like this wouldn't even be on the entity, I guess, but right, well, I guess the entity would have like a pointer to a quest, and then that quest might have a bunch of references to other entities. They're all, NPCs that are all relevant to a quest. Just thinking in terms of like, designing things that the entities have to all come into play with that are not just other entities, right? Like actual game logic for how like a quest or some other kind of objective-based system would play out, right? In the case of like a shooter where your objective is to just go and do a thing, not necessarily go and, collect 10 flowers and bring them to the local alchemist so they can brew you a potion that cures you of your whatever it is, your Skyrim, fungus disease or whatever it is. I don't know.
So that'll be interesting. That'll be very interesting. So I'm going to leave that there for now, actually, and that assert should fire for the sword specifically, actually. Probably, I'm thinking. And so I'm going to go ahead and just let that be for now, and then we're going to come back and take a look at that in a minute. But anyway, that's the current situation. So what I want to do is every time that I add an entity, what I want to do is basically add that entity. And I guess when you add an entity, you've got to give a storage index. That's kind of a requirement at the moment. I suspect, I can't think of any reason why we would allow a 0 storage index. Those would be entities that don't get written back. They only exist inside the sim region. That doesn't seem logical to me. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and assert that the storage index is always something valid. And if we can think of a case later where we want to change that, that's fine. But for now, I don't think we're going to allow that. So go ahead and do this. Then what we want to do is say, all right, for that storage index, what we want to do is remember that that's what this entity is. So I want to do basically to store it in that hash table. So I want to do something like map storage index to entity or something like this, right? And then I pass the sim region, which will store the hash table, and I will go ahead and pass that storage index. So then from then on, and I guess the entity pointer, right? So there's storage index, there's entity pointer. So then from then on, anyone else who asks about the storage index will get this entity back, and so they basically just have that nice mapping done, right? So that's pretty trivial. I don't think that'd be very difficult to write. So we'll just go ahead and write those two right here, right? Like so. So we've got a one that returns an entity and takes an index, like so. That's going to have to take the sim region as well, right? Because it needs to be able to look it up in there. We could just make this a general entity mapping pointer. I don't know if we want to do that. We'll see. We can always pull the code out later. And this one returns nothing. This one is just a thing that is in charge of bringing of setting it, right? So it doesn't actually return any values. It just sets it. And so same thing. I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did before with the tile chunk. I think I'm going to make a hash table. I feel like that's the easiest thing we want, just a quick lookup. That seems totally fine. And so what I want to do is just set my hash table to be some fairly large thing for fast lookups. And I want it to make sure it would store at least the max entity count, for this sim region, right?
Just make sure I finish writing out these procedure declarations. So map storage, well, this is going to be something else. This is get sim entity from index, and it takes the region that we are querying and the index to the entity inside of it. And then this other one does the inverse. It takes the region, the index, I guess I should call this storage index, I don't know. And then the actual entity, right? Yeah. Returns nothing, and I think we're good to go. So this still doesn't exist. That should be declared, and the rest of that ought to be good. Cannot assign. Hold on, what's going on here? So that is a sim entity, and we need to pass in. Where's that other? I did not ever pass in the region here. So we can do that now. And then this has to take the region. That should be a region, not an entity. And now that's good. Okay. And then this just has to return to get rid of that error we don't care about. Still need to implement those, but that is what's next.
So I guess what I do here is say that we've got, I guess, a sim entity hash, something like that, sim entity hash, and that's just going to store the index, and it's going to store the pointer, right? So essentially, it's actually just one of these, but instead of having it as a union, it's actually both of them, right? Does that make sense? So
okay, so should I just call this entity hash or something like that? I don't know. Seems good enough for me. And then up here we can go ahead and define that. In fact, we can look at the definition for that since it's going to have the same stuff. Sim entity hash. And there we go.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to go ahead and say, all right, I've got some number of these in the hash table. There's the hash table. I guess for now, I'll go ahead and hard code this size, but I'm not sure that I want that to be the case for evers, if that makes sense. So we'll go ahead and see. And this is something that may be problematic just because of the clear to zero nature of it. I'm a little bit nervous about it because the reason I'm a little nervous about it is it probably will end up being better to do some kind of a, because there's so few lookups, like a tree or something that's more compact might be a more logical way to do it. Something that requires less clearing. I don't actually know. It's just something to think about, but we'll see. In fact, I can put it to do there. To do, Casey, do I really want a hash for this? Who knows, right? So, okay. When we add these guys in there, chances are, I guess we're probably adding them relatively sequentially. I don't know, we might just go ahead and directly use the index into the hash table for now, because I don't think we need to do anything fancier than that, so we'll see. But anyway, when we go ahead and do our begin sim, what I would like to do is just go ahead and zero that hash out. I don't know if we actually ever made a function for zeroing things. It would be nice, but I don't know if we ever actually did, so we'll see. Yeah, I don't think we actually ever did. We did not, I don't think. Yeah, so I don't know, I don't actually know if you can do, I don't think there's any real good way to do zeroing on this guy. So I'm gonna go ahead and have to write a zeroing function. So, excuse me. Yeah, so when I go ahead and get this guy, I think I'm going to use internal probing this time. Remember we talked about external and internal chaining, I should say, of our hash table. I don't know if you guys remember this. What day are we, where's our, let's get some blank space here. There we go.
I'm really torn on this zeroing thing because I genuinely don't know. I feel like, yeah, because if the memory is unchanged, let's say you did a bunch of stuff with the arena in one pass, and then, but if we use the temp allocator, yeah, I guess I really don't know. Because it's different from before with the permanent storage, because we want that memory to always be whatever it was. But if we use the temp allocator, will it just implicitly clear the transient storage to 0 on every loop? I feel like it would, just by saying that out loud and trying to reason through. I mean, that seems like the whole purpose of the temp allocator is to just kill everything that you don't need after we come back through and do another pass. But I'll have to prove that theory and see whether it actually adds up.
Here's day 64. So I don't know if you remember this, but last time when we did a hash table, we kind of went through it and we said like, all right, we're going to fill in a slot of the hash table. And then if another thing wants to be in that same slot because their hash key is the same, then what we'll do is we'll just make another sort of one out here and point to it. I don't think I'm going to do that this time. I think I'm going to use internal chaining, which basically means that if it's not found in this slot, then it will basically it'll step through the hash table looking for an empty space sequentially, right? So we'll just kind of do this sort of thing. And we can go just by stepping by 1 if we wanted to. A better thing to do sometimes is step by prime numbers. There's all kinds of theory to hash table stuff. Again, right now, that's all performance stuff. We don't really care about that right now. So for now, we're just going to do the simplest possible thing. And then later, we'll actually try to figure out, if we even determine that we do want a hash here, we'll actually go ahead and figure out what to do performance-wise for it. All right, so what we want to do is we're going to look up our index. So let's say we have a hash value. For right now, we can make it equal to the index, so that's fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and step through like so, and look in the hash to try and find one of these guys, to try and find a match. And also, again, index can't really be equal to 0 here, right? Because we're not allowing we always say that low entity indexes, like the storage indexes, 0 means null, so you shouldn't ever be looking up a null. What we could do to make things easier, I guess, is if we wanted to, we could also say that this get sim entity from index always just automatically returns a 0 in the case where it was 0. You know, we do this, basically, right? And maybe that's a better way to go. So basically, this function just becomes that, right? Something like this.
I was not ready for that. Okay, so let's just think through this. So we have our result, which is already cleared to 0 anyway. And so he's not doing this anymore. But we do check to see if index is greater than 0. If it is, we do this business where we get the hash value from the index, and then we're going to do something with the hash. Not sure what exactly, but there's a for loop involved, and this load call is now changed so that we don't need that check. Okay, and that just gets pulled over. I'm gonna listen to him say that again to make sure I understood. Well, I did not, to be clear, I did not understand why he just made that change, but let's see if I can, if I listen to him say it one more time. Because he was starting to implement that get sim entity call, and then he just kind of segued that into modifying the load entity reference, but that's because the assertion that he was making is tied into the fact that you have a check on the index in the first place on the load entity call. I guess. I think that's it. That's got to be it.
Find one of these guys to try and find a match. And also, again, index can't really be equal to 0 here, right? Because we're not allowing we always say that low entity indexes, like the storage indexes, 0 means null, so you shouldn't ever be looking up a null. What we could do to make things easier, I guess, is if we wanted to, we could also say that this get sim entity from index always just automatically returns a 0 in the case where it was 0. You know, we do this basically, right? And maybe that's a better way to go. So basically, this function just becomes that, right? Something like this.
Okay. So yeah, the this right here. Well, what am I doing? The result coming back from this call. Well, is it because we're going to make this get sim entity call in other places? I don't see it in other places. It's just in that one. Yeah. I guess it's because either way, this assertion is going to catch it. So it's just letting this return nothing because we'll assert that we didn't want to return nothing. I don't entirely understand the reason, but that is at least what the mechanics of what's happening here seems to be. Sure, why not?
Yeah, that kind of thing. I'm not actually going to overwrite directly there because I'd rather, since it's a union, I'd rather be able to still see what the index is when we're in the debugger, so I'm going to leave it like that for now. But yeah, so this get sim entity from index will handle the case where index is 0. If index is 0, it will just return a null pointer, so that way we still have the ability to pass nulls through directly, which I like. So we'll go ahead and get the hash value. We'll just call that the index for now. And then we'll go ahead and say our probe value is going to be equal to the hash value, or actually, I guess we'll call this our offset. I'll call that 0. I'll step through the entire array, essentially, right? Whatever that hash is. Worth of offsets, stepping through, and then the place that we're going to look up in the hash is just going to be the hash value plus the offset, and then we're going to go ahead and off that mask. So like just wrap it into the table, like put it into the table properly, right?
Okay, so this is interesting. I get to think about if there's a way to do this just a little bit more Odin-like. Because just incrementing, yeah, by index for the length of the hash. And then using that hash value to create a lookup that's seems a bit elaborate for my normie brain to handle, but you know what? I think we'll just keep it simple and copy what he's doing as closely as possible. So it's going to be less than the region hash length, and then when we index into it, we see what we have at the hash value plus the offset masked with something. Let's find out.
And again, that just ends with that array count -1. This is all stuff we've done before, but just in case, just to refresh your memory, again, basically what I'm doing here is I'm saying, all right, I'm going to look up into this hash table, right? And I want to look up, I want to basically search through the hash table. So most of the time, I'm hoping that I hit it the first time. So this loop won't really loop at all, right? It'll just hit it the first time and then return. But in case it doesn't, it has to look through sequential values. And again, we could make it probe by something other here, like a prime number or something like that. Like I said, there's more hash table theory stuff. Maybe we'll get into a little bit later. But for right now, we'll just probe by ones, looking through the hash table to see if we can find what we're looking for. In order to do that, I need to search the whole hash table, right? So I need to make sure that I would check every individual item in the whole hash table if for some reason the hash table got totally filled, which is a catastrophic case that we don't ever want to happen. So we'd always make sure our hash table is too big to ever have that happen, but point being, that's the correct way to write it. So after we figure out where we're probing, we're starting at some place in the array, right? And when we get to the end of the array, we want to wrap back around to the beginning of the array because we didn't start at the beginning of the array, so we need to check there. So what we're going to do is we're going to mask off the sort of those high bits, and we're only going to use the bits that would actually map into the array. And so right now, like
the way to probably do this is just to use like a map in Odin, right? If I was to do it the quote unquote Odin way, like I'm pretty sure. Let's see. Well, maybe not, because it's... Yeah, I don't know. It would depend. I honestly don't know what the performance implications would be of doing something like that. So we'll do it Casey's way, but I just feel like that's the way you'd want to go. I don't know. Because this just seems like a more manual way of doing such a thing. But maybe that's a bad assumption on my part.
For example, I'll put a thing here too. It just says must be a power of 2.
Oh, and then like I was thinking to myself, oh shoot, I just closed Casey down. Whoops. There he goes. He's back. Yeah, so where else are we doing this? If we go into the world, is it in here somewhere? Yeah, this right here. Okay, yeah. So it literally is exactly like that. I was like, I don't know if that's exactly right, but that is totally what the deal is. But it's this hash value calculation that looks slightly different. Instead of it just being this arbitrary number crunching, we have the index added to whatever this offset is as we are walking the length of the hash. Okay. And then back in sim region type, we have to specify this must be a power of 2.
As we're using that anding off trick. Obviously, if we're just using anding off to wrap into the table, that only works with the power of 2 size, because we're going to check all of the values that those bottom bits could possibly set to, which obviously means it's power of 2. And so what we want to do here is just generate that simple mask from the power of 2. 4096 minus 1 is 4095. That's the bottom 11-bit set, I believe, right? And then we're going to knot that because we want to... oh, wait, no, we don't need to knot that. Never mind. That's the way it should go, right? We want to subtract 1 from that because that will set the bottom bits, and that's the only bits that we want. So we don't actually want the knot there. That was my bad. Shouldn't have had a knot, so I don't think so. Hard to say. I make mistakes on stream all the time, so it happens. Anyway, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull out this sim entity hash, right? So this is the hash value, or sorry, this is the entry, I should say. So I'm going to grab that entry, and I'm going to grab it like this. I'm going to look at the entry, and I'm going to see if the entry index equals the index that we're looking for. Assuming it does, I'm going to set the result equal to whatever the pointer is, and I'm going to break out of the loop. Otherwise, I'm going to assert that the entry index is not equal to 0, because if the entry index was equal to 0, that means that we've hit an empty hash slot, and at the moment, that is not supposed to be allowed, right? Like, we're actually not supposed to, we're always supposed to be able to find it here. So, yeah. So basically what we want to do is, this is the place, and we'll put a to-do there, right? This is the place where we would add, oh, well, you know what? Let's just go ahead and do that. Let's just go ahead and add it. So if, at this point, the entry index is 0, meaning we've hit an empty slot, meaning that this hasn't been stored before, we'll just go ahead and store it, right? That will be the case where we actually add the entity in. So what we want to do there is kind of a little tricky, right? What we'd want to do there is we would want to be able to call this directly from there, right? We'd want to be able to call this call where we just do the add entity right here. We'd want to do entry index equals index, entry pointer equals, add entity, and then results equals entry pointer. Great. So we just make a new one right there. And what we want to do here is we want to be able to pass, I guess these are actually technically storage indexes as well. What we want to do here is we want to actually be able to pass those storage indexes.
Oh, I had that as storage index, and I changed it because of you, Casey. You did this to us. Okay, let's see if I can figure this out. Index becomes storage index. And I still need that space. There we go. And then we just need to call add entity, which looks like what exactly? Does that still only take... No, that takes a whole bunch of stuff. Well, what about this first one? The stored entity, the region, and the storage index. So region, storage index. But where, oh where, is the stored entity going to come from? I don't know.
And the source entity into this. So like, or rather a way to get the source entity. So that in this particular case, when it comes back and it didn't actually exist, it would get pulled in the process of actually going to get the entity, right? Maybe that's a little bit too much to do in that call. So the other way I could do it is make this guy, this get sim entity from index, that could actually just return the sim entity hash lock that it found. That actually seems like a pretty good way to do that as well, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, that's not bad. Right. So basically, if there's a sim entity hash slot there, then that's gonna, yeah. I like this better. I think there was too much stuff going on in this routine because what you wanted to do inside here would probably depend on who was actually looking up the thing, and it just seemed like it was getting a little bit too much stuff packed in there. So what I'd rather do is say, all right, let's go ahead and say that this gets back the hash slot itself, and then the person on the outside can decide what they want to do with that hash slot. So in this case, if the hash equals 0, then what I would do is I just break out right on there, and the result again equals the entry directly, like so, right? So I guess what we could say is if it's 0 or it's the storage index, right? If either of those two things are true, then the probe is done, bail, right? And that seems pretty good to me.
All right, I'm sure I'll appreciate why that's true here very soon. Or maybe not soon, but at some point. So this is just gonna look like that. That becomes part of this conditional, and then we just sail away into the sunset, right? What? Oh yeah, because we have to change this to be a hash result. Oh, come on now. Oh, because it's at that address? Like that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's not bad at all. Yeah. And so I could even get rid of this as well, because this would just work. The first empty index would return it. And so maybe I'm going to go back to my original thinking and say that storage index has to be something. And then that other stuff gets handled out here. Okay, I like that. So basically when we call get sim entity from index, what we want to do now is we want to be able to pull those things in recursively, basically, right? So what we want to do is we want to have more things in here when we're doing our add entity call. We want to be able to do more stuff in here, right? Now, of course, what I will do is before I go and handle some more of that, let me go ahead and just put some stuff together here that's like sort of the destination hash. So when we're storing somebody, we want to go ahead and do this, right? Where we do the same thing again. And this is probably inaptly named at this point. This is actually get hash from storage index. That's actually what it is. So we'll call the get the hash from storage index. That gets us back the hash entry that we're looking for. And then what we want to do is we want to make sure, we want to basically assert. Make sure I am updating those calls. Damn it. There we go.
That if someone's telling us to map the storage entry in, and maybe, you know what, maybe we don't even care. So all we have to do is basically say, all right, if they've stored it before, that's fine. So let's assert that the index that's in the entry equals our storage index, or it's null, right? So either there was nothing in this hash slot before, the one that we're trying to set, or it's equal to the one that we're trying to put in there, right? And that'll just allow us to overset entities, right? It'll allow us to overset hash slots, which seems fine to me as well. So what I basically do is, at that point, we'll initialize it like so, like that. Oops. And so that actually will put an entry into our hash table and say, now whenever anyone asks where this storage index is, entity pointer-wise, we'll give them this back, and off we go, right? So that seems pretty easy. And now that this is the trickier part, like I was saying, store entity reference is easy. Load entity reference is going to be the hard one. Basically what we want to do here, again, same thing we were doing before, where basically we grab out ref index, but now let's actually check. Let's make sure that ref index is actually something we care about now. So assuming that ref index actually is indexing into an entity, we're gonna get out its hash slot, and then we're gonna see, okay, we're gonna basically assume that either I'm trying to think of how exactly we want to do this. It's a little fuzzy in my head right now. Either it's already there because it's already been loaded, or it's not there yet and we would like to load it, right? Does that make sense? So this is going to create a little bit of a recursion here. I'm not sure if I'm thrilled about that recursion. I'm not sure if maybe we should change it into something a little less recursive. But for now, we'll leave it recursive, and we'll see how that goes, I guess. So if I want to load an entity reference, basically what that would do is it'll get out that entry. If the entry pointer is null, then we need to load a new entity into there, right? But if it's not, then we're pretty much good to go. And I could also say, okay, so basically the ref pointer equals the entry pointer, right? So basically the case that I have to worry about is the case where the entry pointer equals null, which means we tried to reference an entity like the sword, but the sword wasn't in there yet. Excuse me. So what I want to do in that case, right, is I want to go ahead and pull that sword in anyway. So I want to basically say here, all right, well then we're going to keep calling down. We'll call down into there, right, with the storage index of this guy, right, the ref index. And I want the low entity that corresponds to that index, right, which I can get. I think we have a get low. Do we have get low entity? Yeah. What we want to do is basically do this call, right? And so this call, which we actually want to put in the H file so we can call it from other places, if that makes sense. So that would go in here for now, I guess. So what I want to do here is I want to get that low entity, the one that corresponds to this index. There we go. So yeah, off we go. So I'm going to go ahead and get that. I need the world, or I guess I need the game state there. And I really wanted these to be, I really would have preferred, again, that they were stored in the world, but they're not stored in the world yet. So I guess that's just the way it's going to have to go, which is fine. It just means that basically these guys will have to take the game state instead of just taking the world. That's something I want to get rid of. But we got so many things that we have to do this full thing correctly, just to put everything into the right places and have it work correctly. I just don't want to deal with it at the moment. One thing at a time.
Sure. Okay. So this... Is this going to have to take the state too? Yeah. Oh boy. There's already so many things. I don't know that we're really going to get the game working again today either. At this point. So add entity is going to take... Well... Oh, get low entity takes the game state. Or does it just take the world? It takes the whole state. And then what index is it taking? The ref index. Okay. And then this should just be region. All right. But load entity reference, wherever that's being called. And somehow we're not calling that yet. What happened? What on earth happened? Add entity. Does add entity already take the state? It does not. So why did he add it?
So anyway, all right, so I added the entity. So now when we do that reference mapping, which we're going to do in here, right? So we do that copy in, we have to do map storage unit that saves this particular guy. In fact, I guess this should be done immediately upon entry. So as soon as we map it, as soon as we have it, we map it, like so on. Yeah, that looks good to me.
All right. So we do that up front. But seriously, why does this procedure need to take the game state? I don't know. What am I missing? Why did he throw it into that signature? There's too much going on. I mean, are we going to call? Perhaps we're going to call that load entity proc now.
So anyway, what we want to do is after we do that romping, we now want to translate that sword index, right? So we want to do a load entity reference to load the sword index, translate it from the old kind of reference, from the index into a pointer, right? So we're going to go ahead and do that, like so. Oops, not source. So this is entity sword, like that. And when we do that, we have to pass it this stuff now, unfortunately.
Okay. So there you go. I knew there had to be a good reason. He just didn't do that for no reason, absent-mindedly. It's not like him. Okay. So, and that's got to be by address, right? And so that means we just need... Oh, wait a minute. This has to be the result. And yeah, so now we just need that state finally. And that'll call that. But this, what is going on here? Really? So it's neither of these. Okay, so what are we missing? What is this fourth thing? Oh, because this needs to take the state. That means this needs to take the state. Need that comma there. And where we go back to that call here, now that has to take the state. Okay. But, okay, yeah, so that's... Hold on, what? I see, yeah, because he was talking about having to do the recursion there. Right. Okay, duh. Duh.
That's just the way that goes. So, now what this does is this will call at entity recursively, basically, to pull in any other references that we find. So we're kind of spidering outwards, grabbing new things into the simulation set as we go. And I probably forgot a bunch of things there because we slammed in a bunch of things.
And I guess the other way, like going, again, off of that other example that I was trying to use, or trying to speak to, very abstractly anyway, was like if this was, instead of this just being one, right, like we would have to go over all of the entity references if it was like a list of tools or equipment or whatever, and then we'd have to load that entity reference for every single one of them, and then any references that those entities have, so on and so forth.
Once, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. So let's see, hash value plus offset and array count minus 1 less, what is the problem? Oh, sorry, here we go, just gotta parenthesize that. Let's see here, ref is not a member of sim region. I agree with that. So what we need here is the game state, I think. Entity does not take 3 arguments, that's true, it takes that game state that we had to pass there. This is as well, same thing, sim entity.
Well, now he's just kind of going through the compiler errors, so I can see where I'll get... We don't have... Yeah, we have a bunch of low stuff going on here that I think just goes away completely, and we can just call all the things off of the entity itself, but I think everything in here is probably good, unless he's not finished or something else that I wrote in here is broken. So I guess what I could do is just build the whole thing and then see... what happens. We've got a whole bunch of stuff going on all inside of the main game file. Yeah. There's one thing in sim region, add entity. Okay. That's what I was looking for. Some other call that I messed up and didn't finish correctly. So now what's going on here? What is this error saying now? Because it wants the low entity. And is that because one of these just does the positioning stuff? Oh. Wait, what? Which one are we calling here? That needs to take the game state. That's fine. But if it's the one that takes the position, that means that we are missing the... Well, the result is the region, and the low is the source. So we're just missing the low index. Okay. So now I think the sim region stuff should be good.
Store entity reference. Store entity reference. Okay, there we go. That's not supposed to be an arrow. These are basically just all little typos that we have to clean up. Nothing particularly interesting going on here. And then finally, okay, so now we're actually in a position to do this properly as well. Right, we've got a sim entity, and what we want to do here is we want to go ahead and actually do where we have our load entity reference. Right, what we'd also like to do, instead of the load, we'd like to have a similar version of this, right? Which is basically like, you know, check entity reference or something like this, or like get entity by index or something like that, by storage index, something like that, where we can basically do a check just to see if it's in there, if that makes any sense. Just seeing purely if it happens to exist in the set. And so basically what that would do is we'd say, all right, you pass the sim region, you pass the storage index, and all it does is it straight up does the check. It grabs the entry out and just returns you whatever the entry's pointer was. It doesn't actually matter whether it's null or not, because you're going to check, right? That makes sense. So now we can actually go ahead and implement that here.
Finish seeing what he was doing there. So get entity by storage index. We get the entry from that get hash function, or procedure rather. Get my wires crossed all the time now, and I'm calling things that other languages call functions procedures, and I call things in Odin functions when I should be calling them procedures. It's great. It's not taxing on my brain at all. So we get our result out from the entry pointer, and then we just return. Expected 1 got 0. That's because this should be my result. Direct shadowing. Oh, because I don't need to declare this. There we go.
Right, that makes sense. So now we can actually go ahead and implement that here. The camera following entity is just get entity by storage index, and we just go ahead and ask it like so for the camera following entity index, right? So if the entity that we are following happens to be in the sim region, then we'll do the update for it. If it doesn't, then we don't. And we don't really have to do anything more specific than that. That just works, I think. Yeah, I think there's really nothing else to it. So all we have to do is say, all right, the camera following entity, we grabbed it out. This doesn't actually have to happen on every index, right? In fact, you know what? We don't even have, this is actually easier. Really all we have to do is do this check. This is stupid. I don't even know why I just wrote that call. Maybe don't even need that call. We'll see. Really all we have to do is just go, oh, is the entity that we just wrote out, right? Is this guy's storage index equal to the camera, the one that we're following? That's it. Why are we even looking at the hash table? We don't need to, right? If it is, then what we want to do is move the camera, right? So entity, or I guess stored, right? Where's that p? Stored p dot chunk z, and then it just goes ahead and does that, right? That's it. That's really simple. Kind of nice too. That's kind of cool how that worked out.
All right, let me see if I can get caught up here again. So maybe, like you said, yeah, we just don't need that. But does he still not? Well, I see. I think. So we get rid of that. We did this. So we change the entity's location. We check and see, hey, is this entity's storage index the same as the camera following entity index? And then if so, that means we have a camera following entity. And then the new camera P starts off with the game state's current camera P, but then we modify it to be this, right? The stored entity's world position chunk Z coordinate, and then all of this, because the rest of this comes off of the high, I think it's just that. And then world, okay. We gotta pull that world out for now. I think I had that there before, but it just kind of went away while I was getting things compiling again yesterday. And then all of this. Do I really want to do that? I don't think I do. And then this is off of stored P. And that sure looks a heck of a lot better. Don't know about the set camera business. I guess we just don't have to think about that anymore. I'm really not sure.
That's it. Nothing else to it, I don't think. Yeah. So set camera, set camera doesn't, we don't even need set camera anymore, right? Because we've done everything now. All we need to do is just remember that the camera is at a different location. But that's it. The set camera call was there to do all of this mapping stuff, but now we're just doing that during the sim stuff. So as far as I know, set camera is just not, did we already delete it? Yeah, it's probably just gone, right? So that's totally fine. So we can get rid of set camera. Set camera's just gone. Nobody cares about set camera at all. We don't care about any of this stuff. That just goes away. Although I couldn't read that because it's by my head. Let me actually read it. Mapping tiles and stairs into the entity set. Yeah, we'll know to do that when we actually go to implement them. We don't really need to do there. All right, so that just does all that, and that's just fine. It's just done.
Awesome. Okay, we might actually get to compile here. I don't know for sure, but I'm optimistic. Oh man, too many hours in front of a screen. Enough is enough. Soon hear enough. Okay, so any other set camera stuff going on in here? We do have it there already commented out, and I think that's basically it. And I think I might just be able to get to work here, chopping through these compiler errors, and we'll see if I come across something that's totally bogus. Something that screws with me enough to where I feel like I need to watch Casey work through his errors to be able to see what's going on with mine. So the low, I don't know that we care about that anymore. I think this just comes off of the entity in the region. And so that would get rid of that error. And then all these other places where we're talking about a low entity. Well, I don't know about that check, but like this is all just on the regular entity now. In which case, do we even need to do this? I had this call in here because there was no other way to get at those things before, but now I think that's gone. Then over here, same thing, right? Although I don't know about the change entity location business. And that's a procedure parameter, so I guess I don't know exactly how that's gonna work. Over here, I guess I can just uncomment this and see. This is like all of the player movement code. Yeah, this is gonna look a bit different, but maybe he'll get to fix this. Shoot, I don't know. This could actually look a bit different. Okay, we're getting into that bogus territory where it's like, okay, you're not going to be able to infer what the hell it is you're supposed to do here. Yeah, where is that? I wish I could see. I wish I could scroll my errors. Where is this at? Yeah, this is over here. Well, does the entity have its stored? It has its storage index, right? No, it's the other way around. Okay, show me how it's done, Casey.
So I think this is mostly just going to be mapping to the sim, the fact that it's got that sim pointer now, right? But I'm thinking that probably the way that we'll do this is we might actually just add stuff in the sim entity eventually as well. But again, one thing at a time. So really all this stuff is just sim dot, right? In fact, we could almost say that low arrow just becomes low arrow sim dot for most things, right? I think that just works. So off we go, blah, blah, blah. Like so, that sword thing will have to change, obviously. These are all, this is going to get a lot simpler than it was. So that's all good. That doesn't have to change, although the move entity stuff does have to get updated. So we'll just check that. Right, these are things, these are going to all change totally. They're going to get vastly simplified probably tomorrow morning, in fact. Yeah, so we don't have to worry too much about those, so change that. All right, so now what we have here is our sword.index. So that's what we want to do there.
Where did the entity come from? Add low entity result. Oh, low entity result is still a thing. So like in here, yeah, we still have that. So like that. Right, and then where did the add low entity thing go? So he zeroes out that, well, I guess it's fine because it would zero out the sim too. Okay. So like everywhere that happens, okay, so maybe that actually makes things, I don't know about the update code, but things like this, I think, wait a minute, what? Why would height be a bool? I screwed that up. What was that originally? Those should be floats. That's messed up. Okay, well, that ought to help. And it does. Well, this should be... What did he set that to? I think I saw him do that. Where's that add player change, man? Yeah. Okay, so sword, the sword has an index, and that points at the sword low index. Is it that simple? Wow.
That looks like we just need to set it because we have that ref type now. Nothing particularly interesting going on there. So now our move entity call, that really has to get ported out to the sim, right? Because that's supposed to be something that happens in the sim. So let's go ahead and get that in there. So here's our simulation stuff, begin sim, end sim. And so probably I'll put that down at the bottom for now. So when we do move entity, what that's going to do, that's going to be on the sim region now, right? And that's...
There's probably a bunch of other places here. Yeah, like over here. This should be, well, no innate hit points. I have no idea. Yeah, over here. Anywhere, like you said. So actually, everywhere where there is a low reference is not going away. It's only after we get it out, I guess, that we would see those accesses go away. But it sounded like he wanted to get rid of that eventually anyways. So, yeah, let's just see if we can keep making progress here. This should just be off of the entity, right? Yep. Same thing over here. Looking good. What else do we got? Force entity into high, 1125. What's that? This should just be off of the entity as well. And then, yeah, procedure parameter. What is going on over here? There's the same thing. Yeah, it's the update code that I'm less clear on. I think it means that this should be a pointer. Yeah, maybe we'll still get the low out of here. That was probably the wrong call. We'll just see if we can do that, and then, yeah, update sword. Should it be a pointer? What even was it before? Was this ever a pointer? Let's see what else Casey has to do to get this running, because I just don't see it. It's not obvious to me. But maybe I can check and see if there's any other places here that should be easy. Yeah, further up. Looks like all of those should be off of the plain entity. Yeah, I changed those all incorrectly, so whoops. That's good. Also good. What is your problem here? Player delta, wall normal. It's because I commented out all of this code, huh? And then this should just be off of the regular entity. Or should it be test entity? No, that's right. Yeah, so this is where I think things get a little bit trickier, because I feel like to know which entities we're going to collide with or test collisions against, we're going to have to know the region. Is the region on the entity? I keep on checking to see if it is, and I don't think it is. So no, we'll probably have to pass it in or otherwise get that information somewhere else. All of that will probably look different. Same thing with that. Yeah. So we're getting pretty close, but it's still, should probably clear that out. Yeah. Much, much closer now, but the collision code and then some of the update code, it's just not obvious to me where we need to go to get that working at this point.
We're going to take just an entity pointer, and that's going to be the entity who is getting moved. We still want the move spec and his acceleration. That all seems good. We have the world like so. This is all easy to deal with. What else we got? Is that sim entity, not entity. The move specs. Where do those move specs come from? We didn't ever loft those out into an H file, which we should have. So there we go. So move specs are something that I'm going to put in the sim region as well. Just put them up here for now. Think about them a little bit later.
All right then. Go ahead and follow suit. So that goes into sim region stuff. And then, yeah, still need to think about that. Still need to think about the temp allocator. Just a ton of change to be aware of. And then that shouldn't be a problem, and we can keep going.
And now entity.high is always just entity, right? We don't have any more of this .high nonsense. That all goes away into just entity. And this is nice because, again, this is starting to now collapse down into code that just looks like if you wrote something without ever having to think about the fact that there's all this complexity in terms of managing large entity sets and, you know, not simulating every frame, which is what we'd like, right? Ideally, we'd like the code to not, most of our code to never look like there's anything special going on, because then that means every time someone adds something to it, they don't have to think about it too hard, right? Before, it was definitely in this place where you had to think a lot about it when you added stuff, and we don't want that. So it's really good seeing this stuff collapse that way, because that's, you know, what I was hoping for, right? And so again, .low also, and I guess .low arrow sim just goes away entirely, right? That just becomes straight up accessors. And this right here, the test high entity index, where this is going to loop over all the stuff in our sim region, which is, again, you know, something we want. This is something we're going to want spatial partition for eventually. Spatial partition here, right? But for now, we're totally fine. So we have our entity count. We're going to loop over our region's entity count. Like so. Should probably call that a sim region instead of region. I don't know why I'm calling it region in some places. So I kind of want that to be called sim region. And so
Whoa, he made that change somehow, and I did not notice. Seriously? That's the change I was waiting for him to make. I knew he had to make it. I should have just assumed and gone for it. But I am a fool. Okay, so he must have done that when he changed this here. And I'm just going to keep calling them regions because, I don't know, it seems totally reasonable to me to do things that way. And then, do we care about the world? I don't know. Is he still going to have to pass that in? Oh, he gets it off of the region. I forgot that we threw the world on the region. I knew we had some pointers being thrown on other types in there. I kept on thinking it was the region on the entity, but it's the world on the region. Okay. And then this, do we... Well, I guess we don't need to do that at all, do we? Because where even is low being used anywhere else? It's not. Yeah. What even was that? This is entity from high index. I guess I commented that out. But, I mean, we don't have any more high entities in that sense, so that's fine. Oh, and then the update familiar code. Yeah, so instead of game state, this will probably pass in a region as well. Wow, it just makes so much sense at this point. You can see everywhere where you wanted to pass in the entire game state, you would just pass in a region that you cared about specifically that you wanted to update. So I think that just goes away. Oh, the move spec stuff. Where was that? Oh, that's all right here. Right. Because this needs to be... I guess this should just go wherever... Oh, no, it has to go up here. Okay. Yeah, well, that makes sense right there then. Okay, then he does the replacement of high member accesses everywhere, and then he does that. We're going to do a spatial partition, and then over here, we're going over the region's entity count. So, yeah, I wonder how that's going to look. Because... yeah. So I was thinking about this elsewhere, and it wasn't right here. It must be in the familiar update code. Because the entire region is not going to be filled. Or the entire region, the region's entire entities slice is not going to be filled. So it makes sense why you'd only want to iterate up to the count in the region. But, like, how do I want to handle that? We could just do it this way, and then we could break if we get an index that's higher than the count, but then we have to pull the index out of the iteration anyways. So it kind of just seems like we just say test index, and I think we'll be able to start at 0, but I'm not sure. And then we go to entity count, and then we pull out a reference. And I suppose we only do that if the test index is not equivalent to our entity's storage index. Is that right? I mean, couldn't you just do this, actually? Make sure the pointers are not equivalent. I think maybe you can just do that, but we'll see.
We're totally fine. So we have our entity count. We're going to loop over our region's entity count, like so. Should probably call that a sim region instead of region. I don't know why I'm calling it region in some places, so I kind of want that to be called sim region. And so that's going to loop over those like so. And test high entity index is not what we want to do here. Is basically say that the entity pointers are not the same, probably, right? Oh, man, I was just getting into that. I hate having to stop on the hour boundaries, man. That's just not the way it should.
Oh, it feels really good. So he just said it right after I was speculating that that's what we would want to do. I just like it. It's such a simple thing. It's a totally reasonable conclusion to come to. But that's why I'm glad, because if I was wrong about something that seems perfectly reasonable to assume, then that's on me for being, like, I really need to question my understanding of what it is I think is going on. So that feels good to actually get that right.
Go.
Feels good to get anything right when there's this much code changing and it's a domain of programming that I'm still relatively new to, and it's in a language that I'm still relatively unaccustomed to. It's a whole lot of stuff to consider.
Well, you know, what can you do? That's the rules. Only an hour a night. You don't get to just keep going just because you want to. Unfortunately, that's the way it goes. So yeah, so we'll just do entity is not equal to test entity, like so, and then this stuff just goes away. No more of that. No more of this. No more of that. No more of any of this. That is just now a nice, really simple thing. It just looks like what you would normally write without having to think about anything, and it's fine.
Okay, so let's see here as we wrap this up. I guess I'll just go ahead and test that the other way around. Why not? So if we are not trying to collide with ourselves, then we say, hey, get rid of all that low crap, which is nice. Oh man, there we go. So that goes away. This is just this. And same thing here and here. And then down here, we just take this out of the region. And I don't know about the whole low stuff. Oh, this should just be entities, and then the hit index. Oh, we got to get rid of high there too. Where did we even declare that? Yeah, right here. Let's just, oh shoot. Let's see if I can manage this. High index just gets replaced with index, and then there you go. See, I don't know about, because well, yeah, the stored index is on there, isn't it? It is. Oh my goodness. I don't even know if he's actually going to keep any of this around, but we'll just go ahead and do that. But we don't have the game state, so we can't actually grab that. I guess we'll see what he does. Yeah, we got to get rid of the low stuff. We got to change everything to stored too. How much is left? Oh yeah, the update familiar code. I wonder. Okay. So this should probably just take in a region. I would think. And so you wouldn't need to do this. I'm just going to go for it and see. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Whoops. And we'll go from 0 to, well, I guess we'd go up to the entity count. Region.entity count. And then we would pull the test entity out of the region's entities, just like with the collision code. And then that goes away. And that goes away. And then the move entity stuff just takes the region. And what's going on here? Is it because it needs to be a reference? What even is that? Oh, right. Yeah, because we don't pass in, well, can't I just do this then? I don't know if that's actually, yeah, because it's a procedure parameter. I think the whole thing is going to have to take a pointer at this point. We will see.
Same thing with hit high, hit low. That stuff all goes away pretty much because we can now just do entity star hit, right? Entity, and let's take a look at where that happens, right? So hit entity now just equals test entity, like that.
I guess that does make more sense, doesn't it? So instead of hit index, we say there's a hint entity, and then we don't have to do it, that thing where we pull it out. We just assign it to the test entity that we were testing against. And it's a sim entity. So everywhere there's a hit index, we go ahead and replace those. And then we check to see if the hit entity was not equal to nil. And we can do that stuff, and we can Get rid of that. I don't know about this. What? Oh, because it needs to be a pointer. And then is he going to have to dereference all of those?
Get rid of all that. Oops. So.
No, it should have been a pointer to begin with. And also it shouldn't be the index. It should be... Yeah, whoops. Okay. Now we're good. Okay.
And then down here, you don't have to do any of that. You just have hit entity, and later we can do stuff with it.
Okay, so he just gets rid of all of that. Or does he?
Do any of that. You just have hit entity, and later we can do stuff with it.
Okay, so this just goes away. But we're holding on to this because we're going to need to do stuff with stairs once we reintroduce stairs into the game again.
All right. Almost done. Entity. Test wall. Yeah, test wall should probably be moved in here. All right, I said I was going to stop, but I'm kind of into it right now. So, you know, sometimes you go just a couple minutes extra. And I started 5 minutes late. I want to point out the fact to you that I did start 5 minutes late. So technically, I feel like you owe me an extra 5 minutes. You know what I'm saying? That's what I think. So anyway, all right. We no longer have to do this. That's done. And then we no longer have to do either of these. So that's good, too. So that just moves the entity, and now everything in there is just nice and clean and is totally... none of this, I don't even know what this stuff was even here for. This is some old, yeah, that was some range checking stuff. Get rid of that entirely. Yeah, starting to look nicer. All right, yeah, I guess that's a good place. Entity from high index. I don't even know what that was there for. That's gone. Goodbye. Yeah, so we still have a bunch of work to do, obviously, to finish our port. Plenty of work to do. But tomorrow morning, we could finish. We could finish. It's an impossibility. It is a possibility. Tomorrow's Friday, right? Friday morning. It's possible. I don't know. I'm not gonna promise anything, but it's possible. And then we would be in really good shape, I think. That would be some good cleanup work that we did there. Good architectural shift. So I think that's mostly what we want to do. I'm gonna leave a couple notes in here for ourselves. We begin sim to do Casey important clear the hash table. Otherwise, we're gonna be very sad pandas about that. And then we also have another thing to do, which is notion of active versus inactive entities for the apron we talked about yesterday. So just so I don't forget those. Okay, now we can go to the Q&A. If you would please.
As per usual, I really don't have time to sit around and listen to the Q&A. I got things to do, including relieve myself because I try not to do it in the middle of a stream because I just want to get through the code and be done with it, because that's the most important thing, is doing the thing and leaving it all on the table to see if we can do the thing just a little bit better each day. But we're getting really close here. Some of these, is that back in the, oh, I'm in the wrong file. Oh, hit point stuff. Yeah, because that's coming off of a sim entity now. I wonder if I can just do that and, yeah, fix those errors. So we've chopped through quite a bit of the issues with moving into this notion of having simulated regions of the game world where we can make state updates to our entities and have it be a lot more ergonomic to work with. Pretty awesome stuff, honestly. I definitely have a much better understanding of what is happening and why making all this change was so valuable, as opposed to when I was doing things in Zig, and as I've harped on about, I don't know, it's probably a combination of things. It's a combination of Odin feeling just super ergonomic to work with, but also me getting more and more exposed to the domain of games programming. And this is only a very small, narrow slice of it, right? Working with entity code and doing some spatial partitioning stuff. There's a whole lot more, specifically the rendering business, which we'll get to in a few short weeks, which I'm very much looking forward to, because that'll be more interesting visually. Obviously, just looking at code, it's hard enough for me to do it all day, but to actually get some stuff going on the screen that's interesting to look at and fun to experiment with, that's when the quote-unquote magic will happen, I think. So thanks for hanging out with me for another day of Odinmade Hero. Tomorrow we'll be back to work on finishing up the simulation region stuff and hopefully have the game running again. And if I'm lucky at all, and if I've done anything correctly thus far, we won't have really annoying bugs to sift through while we get this thing rebuilding again. Hopefully I don't see anything just totally messed up where we're the tiles aren't loading in, or the trees, whatever, or the player's not, there could be any number of things with a big change like this. But if it happens, it happens, and we'll just deal with it on stream as best as we can. So yeah, have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.